Hi, my name is Matthew Jester, making a quick video here. So I have a certificate of completion to show that I'm certified and competent in the field of hypnosis. This is from Mike Mandel Hypnosis Academy. I have also a news article here. This is referencing what the video is going to be about. So as you can see, it's referencing some letters that Billie Eilish received. These were death threat letters. So, you know, the celebrity Billie Eilish. This is a TMZ article about the event and, you know, alleged death threats that she received. So, upon investigation of the alleged death threats, I found some very interesting information I wanted the public to be aware of. Specifically regarding the letter content, as you can see here, the content of the letters and the actual copies of the death threat letters or alleged death threat letters are available on the website TMZ. So, as you can see, you can feel free to go ahead and download those off their website. And I'm going to go ahead and get started with just my general introduction. Please watch my video, Hypnosis, Abuse, and Speech Inhibition. I will leave a link to watch the video in the description. I will also leave additional links in the description of other relevant videos. I've been abused and tortured with hypnosis, and my ability to speak is being inhibited with hypnosis, which is why I have to read everything when I make videos, like I am right now. If you notice me stuttering, speaking slowly, being unable to speak clearly, or any other difficulty speaking, I explain in detail the specific methods and techniques that are being used to inhibit my ability to speak in my video, Hypnosis, Abuse, and Speech Inhibition. These issues speak and occur consistently in each of my videos, specifically within the first 3 minutes. The hypnosis inhibiting my ability to speak is often very noticeable throughout my videos, and I will leave a list of the various hypnotic commands that are specifically being used to inhibit my ability to speak that can be recognized in my body language, facial expressions, tone of voice, and speech patterns in the description. Difficulties reading, experiencing physical strain reading, and being hypnotized to act angry or resisting post-hypnotic suggestions are commonly seen in my videos specifically. And the first thing I noticed in the letters was that it looked like his hand was cramping while writing because of similar alterations in his handwriting that happened to me while writing the word murder in a witness statement. As a result of hypnotic writing impairment, I speak about the details of the alterations in my videos on hypnosis and handwriting. A majority of the letter content pertains to religion and government corruption, which initially appear to be delusions caused by mental illness, although upon further examination, the letter content was most likely influenced and controlled using hypnosis to create the appearance of mental illness in order to avoid further examination and to avoid raising suspicion. In the letters, he also makes several references regarding equity and reform. Equity is a quality of being fair and impartial. Reform typically pertains to changing a social, political, or economic institution or practice. Merriam-Webster also references reform as putting an end to an evil or causing to abandon evil ways in the definitions. Throughout the letters, it initially appears as if John Matthew Hurl made various threats towards Billie Eilish, although upon examination, he never once implies he intended to cause her any harm and makes several statements that appear to actually be warnings because he specifically uses the word die instead of kill every time, and he even goes as far as offering to protect her, which raises profound suspicion regarding contradicting intentions and motives. A majority of the letter content with an understanding of the context that is referencing equity, reform, warning her of potential dangers, and offering to protect her, which are in all reality very ethical things to do. So, in this video, I'm also going to review the various implications in the letter content that indicate John Matthew Hurl was influenced by hypnosis when he wrote the letters, and that the supposed death threat letters sent to the celebrity Billie Eilish were premeditated by the same organized criminal operation that hypnotized me. While reading and analyzing the letters, I noticed 4 specific patterns that were extraordinarily suspicious and unusual for the situation, such as the letters containing no direct threats of death, the letters containing specific phrases that cued the recollection of certain metaphors and concepts that were related to the situation. The letter content elicited specific communication patterns that were characteristic of the hypnotic speech impairment I'm experiencing, and the letters mention the same person who is a primary suspect involved in the organized criminal operation. I'll be reviewing all of these throughout the video. And let's see. So, I'll go ahead and read the first one. So this is off of page 1 on the letters. Here's some info I need you to know. If you don't take it seriously, you will die. The first quote referencing death from the letters is written in the context that he is warning her about something and that if she doesn't listen, she is going to die. The warning he tells her isn't warning her about what he is going to do or what he can do, contains no threats of death, and contains no implication that he is directly intending to harm her in any way under any circumstances. The specific context in the warning is actually consistent with a communication impairment caused by hypnosis that I explain it in further detail on part 2 of this video. The second quote, referencing death from the letters, directly contradicts the notion that he is intentionally threatening to kill her because he is offering to protect her and directly stating that earthquakes would be the cause of her death, not him. Let me read that specifically for you. You need to shelter me and I can protect you from hell. Earthquakes will happen and you will die if you don't. Let's see. This raises extreme suspicion regarding the validity of the claims that he was threatening to kill her in these letters, because if every statement he made is taken literally in the context he wrote it, he is warning her that her life is in danger and offering to protect her. The final quote, let me go ahead and read this. So these are the quotes on here, right? And this one is a little bit, sounds a little bit more threatening than of a warning, but I will explain in further detail later in the video as well. So, what it exactly means. You can't get what you want unless what you want is to die for me. You will know that soon the water will rise and you very well might die. And you might very well die. You will die. What are you dying for? Okay. So the final quotes referencing death on page 8 of the letters are also literal warnings that her life is in danger, in which he is not making any threats to harm her. The claims that John Matthew Hurrell made in the letters were not necessarily true or correct, which is actually further evidence that the content of the letters were premeditated due to misleading and deceptive methods utilized by the organized criminal operation to discredit their victims. Specifically, the organized criminal operation utilized hypnotic metaphors to discredit and invalidate their victims' testimonies by creating the false impression that the victims were mentally ill instead of victims of crime, which is a cynical form of psychological manipulation commonly known as gaslighting. I will give and explain some specific examples of the hypnotic metaphors used in this context in part 3. So, moving on from that. Also, I wanted to include, so in regards to what John Matthew Hurrell actually wrote in the letters, he didn't write anything actually about hypnosis, and in fact, he most likely didn't even know that he was hypnotized, because they wouldn't want to risk him saying anything about hypnosis in the death threat letters to the celebrity Billie Eilish. Although I would advise John Matthew Hurrell, especially if he's watching this, to learn what a hypnotic seal is. I can leave a link in the description explaining what hypnotic seals are, by the way. Pattern interrupts involve interrupting a habituated pattern and starting a different pattern, or changing and altering the pattern. If a person is interrupted in the middle of a habituated pattern, they become disoriented. The person doesn't know what to do. The individual's brain begins seeking resolution for reorientation. During the reorientation response, an individual can be more suggestible or susceptible to hypnotic commands as a form of resolution to the pattern interruption. This can commonly be used for hypnotic inductions, as well as allowing hypnotic commands to be cued, given, and elicited without being questioned or detected by conscious awareness. An example of this is interrupting a thought pattern with a brief distraction so that hypnotic memory repression could repress part or all of the thought pattern from an individual's memory while they are consciously focused on the distraction. An individual will be more likely to believe they coincidentally forgot or not know they ever even forgot anything if a distraction is used. This could be specifically necessary if hypnotic memory repression was cued while an individual is writing, because the unfinished handwriting would be evidence of the pattern interrupt and memory repression. Making it too noticeable, this was specifically identified when John Matthew Hurrell underlined, and I'll quote it here, quote, "If you don't take this seriously, you will die," quote, end quote. Because the communication pattern seemed interrupted and altered afterwards, since the explanation he provided her seemed completely irrelevant and illogical to the extent it raised an extreme amount of suspicion. The pattern interrupt was used when I would attempt to write down the hypnotic metaphors they used on me as evidence so that I would seem mentally ill if I ever tried explaining the hypnotic metaphors to anyone. And that's just the introduction to part 2. Let's see. So one of the patterns identified in the letter content was a brief portion of impaired handwriting for specified content, which was will die. And what you can see is it looked as if he had a difficulty with motor coordination in his pen strokes, and it's illegible. The size of the handwriting is larger to compensate for the loss of motor coordination, and as well as the writing deviates from the baseline. The shaping of the letters is abnormal and does not match the rest of his handwriting and all the letters in the samples. And let's see, underlined sentence after writing specified content. Oh, wait. So, by the way, specified content indicates hypnotic commands were cued. So, when he was writing that, he was cued to have his hand cramp with hypnosis. That was also a cue to underline after he finished writing to distract him from what he was about to write. The underlined sentence after writing specified content. When underlining portions of writing, the underline is drawn after writing the portions of writing that are intended to be underlined. So, instead of underlining first and then writing will die on top of it, he writes will die and then underlines it afterwards. That's just normal in handwriting. So, since underlines are drawn after writing, the underline interrupted the communication and train of thought, serving as a distraction, which would enable hypnotic memory repression to occur without being consciously detected by the victim. After drawing the underline, handwriting patterns returned to normal. So his handwriting was briefly altered for a very brief moment, just specifically while writing the words will die, and then completely returned back to normal, which is very suspicious and abnormal, very unusual. Moving on from that, the first statement directly implied danger of death and directly stated he was going to elaborate and explain the implied danger of death, although after the underline interrupted the communication pattern, he does not elaborate, explain, or even reference the implied danger of death. After the underline interrupted the communication pattern, it seemed as if he completely changed the subject. And I'll go ahead and just elaborate even more here. I identified several patterns in the letter content that indicated he had an inability to effectively communicate, such as confusing, indirect, vague, and excessively repetitive statements that do not effectively explain any specific concept or idea. These were the same patterns that I noticed and identified when my ability to speak and write and articulate was inhibited by hypnosis. The speech pattern of talking in circles is recognized through repeatedly attempting to explain or elaborate a single subject in further detail unsuccessfully. The metaphor talking in circles represents repetition without making any progress, as if going around in a circle repeatedly, because it leads the conversation right back to where it started in the first place. I'll go ahead and elaborate as well. So, what the specified context is here is some info I need you to know, and then he underlines this portion. If you don't take it seriously, you will die. And then that's where there is space and the underline. After that, this is the information that he claims that he wants her to know. Life comes from growth, right? Without growth, you would sit in limbo or degenerate. You cannot have stable growth without balance or a foundation, which ultimately is you moving straight forward in your desire and becoming that through actions and illegible word. You desire life, I already know, but while illegible word might be coveted because humans' love is fake, it's better to be better, and you will find much better than gold for your work and effort. So, if you're confused reading that, that's exactly what I mean by it is extremely abnormal that he would be making such a strong statement saying that this is life-saving information for you, and then completely change the subject, and as if he didn't even notice it. Let's see. So, a metaphor relates two or more unrelated subjects using symbolism. He primarily communicated with metaphorical, symbolic, and non-literal terms. such as growth, foundation, and balance. Hypnotic metaphors are commonly used to distract and entertain conscious attention with a story so that hypnotic commands could be cued, given, and elicited without being questioned and consciously detected by the subject. One of the primary methods used to create the false impression that I was mentally ill and delusional was using hypnotic metaphors and repressing a portion of the hypnotic metaphor context from my memory whenever I attempted to explain the hypnotic metaphor to someone else. Metaphorical symbolism effectively provides a rational and reasonable relation between unrelated subjects in non-literal and metaphorical context, so that the metaphors make sense. Incomplete metaphors provide an illogical and unreasonable relation between unrelated subjects in all contexts due to incomplete symbolism, so I would look insane attempting to explain any hypnotic metaphors because I was hypnotized to only be able to explain incomplete metaphors. A basic interpretation for the isolated sample of context implied that she needs to obtain and maintain growth by moving straight forward in her desire in order to live. This does not provide specific instructions, as most people possess multiple desires. If combining this message, the political references and environmental references later throughout the letters, it's possible that the specific reference implied that her desire was to resolve climate change. Just a possibility. So I'm going to go ahead and elaborate in further detail the interpretation and meaning of at least the specified context that he did have in that one letter. And that's only from page 1. So, life comes from growth, right? That's a quote from the letters. In order to live, you need to grow. That's how you can interpret that. Then he says, without growth, you would sit in limbo or degenerate. An interpretation of this is this statement contradicts the first unless she would die sitting in limbo or degenerating. It's a little bit confusing because limbo or degenerate is just different than dying, right? You cannot have stable growth without balance or a foundation, which ultimately is you moving straight forward in your desire and becoming that through actions and illegible word. So, to interpret that, he states that since life comes from growth, she can ensure a reliable and dependable source of growth from maintaining balance or a foundation. He states balance and foundation is moving straight forward in your desire. He states that moving straight forward in your desire can be obtained through actions and illegible word. You can see he attempts to describe how to obtain stable growth in multiple different ways, indicating he failed to communicate effectively, indicating an impaired ability to articulate himself, similar to how I just did, right? Describing the same thing in multiple different ways, kind of like talking in circles. You desire life, I already know, but while illegible word is coveted because humans' love is fake, it's better to be better, and you will find much better than gold for your work and effort. Excessively repetitive and vague use of the word better, this statement implies an invaluable reward for work and effort, most likely referencing a philosophical or non-materialistic reward. So, that's done with part 2. Moving on to part 3. This is going to be the longest part of the entire video. Throughout the letters, there were specific phrases that cued me to recall specific metaphors and concepts that were related to the situation. A metaphor relates to or more unrelated subjects using symbolism. Hypnotic metaphors distract and entertain your conscious awareness and attention with the story so that hypnotic commands can be cued, given, and elicited without being detected or noticed. An isomorphic metaphor relates unrelated subjects using symbolism that relates to a specific situation or problem in an individual's life. Isomorphic metaphors often require understanding of the specific situation or problem. The metaphor is related to in order to comprehend and understand the metaphor. Nested loop metaphors are metaphors within metaphors, typically consisting of at least 3 different metaphors. For example, story A tells story B tells story C, then after finishing story C, returning to and finishing story B, then after finishing story B, returning to and finishing story A. The concept may sound fairly confusing, although nested loop metaphors intentionally use confusion to give and elicit post-hypnotic suggestions undetected, or hypnotic commands. Incomplete metaphors provide an illogical or an illogical and unreasonable relation between unrelated subjects in all contexts due to incomplete symbolism. So I would seem insane if I attempted to explain any of the hypnotic metaphors they used on me because I was hypnotized to only be able to articulate incomplete metaphors. All of these different types of metaphors were used on me, so several of the metaphors may not make sense, may be very confusing until the specific situations the metaphors are referencing are completely explained and until the nested loops of metaphors are completed. So, in other words, you have to kind of watch the entire video to get an understanding of what all the metaphors mean, or else they might not make sense. And they did that to try to make it so that I would seem crazy trying to explain it to anybody. The first phrase that specifically cued the recollection of hypnotic metaphors and other concepts was on page 6. You need to shelter me, and I can protect you from hell. Earthquakes will happen, and you will die if you don't. When I read this, I was cued to think that John Matthew Hurl wasn't threatening to kill her or harm her in any way, but that he was actually trying to protect her and warn her that her life was in danger just like I was. And also that when he said she needed to shelter him, that he would be able to protect her, but he would only be able to protect her if she was willing to shelter him, so that he would have the means necessary to do so. When I read, let's see. I will explain this in further detail in my next video about post-hypnotic suggestions. I was also hypnotized to think the reference to hell in the quote was a reference to Billie Eilish's song, All the Good Girls Go to Hell. I was also hypnotized to think that it was a reference to using dysphoria and punishment to deter me from being political because the song was about the political subject, global warming. I was also hypnotized to think it was a reference to an acronym they told me for the word because, which referenced what they told me they were going to do to Billie Eilish for snitching on them, just like what the Mexican cartel does to people for snitching. I was also hypnotized to think it referenced trying to put me back in jail because I wouldn't stay at a homeless shelter, and that the jail was supposed to protect the criminal organization from law enforcement because of me. The last phrases that specifically cued the recollection of hypnotic metaphors and other concepts was on page 8. You can't get what you want unless what you want is to die for me. You will know that soon the water will rise and you very well might die. And you will die. What are you dying for? He also makes another reference towards earthquakes in a postscript note on page 8. So, like I said, there's a lot of context and understanding needed to be able to comprehend the situation. So, first I'm going to explain a concept in hypnosis that is known as the critical faculty, most commonly actually referred to as the critical factor, although they're the exact same thing. In hypnosis, there is a concept known as the critical faculty, which is responsible for processing, interpreting, analyzing, and questioning information before acceptance into the unconscious mind. Children under the ages of 7 have underdeveloped critical faculties that readily accept information without questioning, processing, analyzing, or interpreting the information. An example of this would be how children believe in the Easter Bunny, Santa Claus, and the Tooth Fairy. In the deep hypnotic trance, called somnambulism, which is commonly seen in stage hypnosis shows, the critical faculty can be less capable of rejecting information than that of a small child's. In fact, hypnosis can be considered extremely dangerous when utilized unethically to make a victim appear to be mentally ill by replicating the presentation of symptoms such as paranoia, hallucinations, and delusions. An example of this is how a young child believing in the Easter Bunny, Tooth Fairy, or Santa Claus is obviously completely normal and is not a symptom of paranoia, hallucinations, or delusions. The same is true with hypnosis, although to an even more extreme extent, for susceptible individuals from clucking like a chicken or meowing like a cat to believing they can fluently speak a language they don't even know, to believing their tennis shoe is a telephone, believing they had a conversation with someone that called their shoe, etc. Just like when dreaming, the abnormal and scientifically impossible perceptions are simply produced by our unconscious minds and not symptomatic of mental illness. Okay, and then, so this is going to be Make-A-Wish murder. And this is kind of a complicated subject, but I'll go ahead and start explaining it. The story sounds difficult to believe, although with an understanding of how hypnosis works and the phenomena that hypnosis can produce, it's easy to understand how they were able to get me to believe it using hypnosis. The people that hypnotized me impersonated the Make-A-Wish Foundation. I was told that I was going to make a movie for the Make-A-Wish Foundation, and that the Make-A-Wish Foundation was going to give me, quote, everything I wanted. I was told that they were going to hypnotize someone to commit suicide to prevent me from committing suicide. I was told that all I needed to do was ensure to buy him cigarettes, and he wouldn't kill himself, because if he didn't have cigarettes, that he was going to think that the Mexican cartel was going to kill him. Sorry about that. I was told that all I needed to do was ensure to buy him cigarettes, and he wouldn't kill himself, but if he didn't have cigarettes, that he was going to think that the Mexican cartel was going to kill him. McKay Cody James discussed feelings of suicide and fears that the Mexican cartel was going to kill him before he killed himself. I found his body hanging from a tree while looking for a tree to hang myself on to commit suicide. This actually worked to prevent me from using the noose knot I had already tied to commit suicide prior to finding his body, because I had to call the police and file a police report. When I first found his body, I didn't know I found a dead body and thought it was a Halloween decoration that was left out hanging from a tree. I found a large branch and poked his stomach to see if his stomach decompressed, and it didn't. It was actually very stiff, but when I got close enough, I smelled a strong odor and saw maggots crawling out of his face, which was blue and purple, completely unable to recognize his face. I checked his wallet for ID, which read McKay Cody James, and called the police after washing my hands. I returned to the camp after I finished talking to the police and discovered my friend, who mysteriously disappeared one day, named Cody, actually introduced himself to me by his middle name because his full name was McKay Cody James. After discovering I didn't just poke a dead body with a stick, I poked my dead friend with a stick. I developed an eating disorder and PTSD from it. I was hypnotized to believe that my friend died because of a freak accident during the movie production, instead of him being murdered with hypnosis. I was hypnotized to think it was my fault he committed suicide because I didn't buy him cigarettes, but at the time I didn't even know he was hypnotized, let alone hypnotized to commit suicide without cigarettes. Since I was already taking tranquilizer medication and frequently visited the emergency room, I was hypnotized to think the tranquilizer medication, Klonopin, meant it's not my fault, and the tranquilizer medication value meant I didn't know. I was hypnotized to think any emergency room visit was a movie scene, and that these medications were supposed to represent different movie scripts, that it's not my fault meant it's not my fault I wanted to kill him, and that I didn't know meant I didn't know he was hypnotized to commit suicide if I didn't buy him cigarettes. I was also hypnotized to think that Klonopin meant I was making movie scenes, and that value meant an emergency medical intermission for my movie. I was hypnotized to believe that hypnosis was inhibiting me because I didn't care enough about Cody in an attempt to abuse me for witnessing his murder without me knowing it. Since I sincerely cared about Cody, the post-hypnotic suggestion to believe otherwise was completely ineffective, which cued the post-hypnotic suggestion to think that I shouldn't think about my dead friend so much during my movie, because then people would find out that someone died making my movie for the Make-A-Wish Foundation. The people that hypnotized me also threatened me for talking about my dead friend. I was threatened that they were going to use my innocence regarding the situation with my dead friend Cody to make Donald Trump seem innocent and frame me for it. I was also hypnotized to think that my dead friend smelled, quote, fragrant, end quote, before eating to keep me from eating. And I'm going to go ahead and explain a little bit of hyperventilation syndrome. So the Make-A-Wish Foundation concept also seemed more believable to me because of how severe my hyperventilation syndrome was, considering that I should have broken a world record for it. I used to hyperventilate for 3 hours at a time, 3 times a day. I actually explained that in further detail when I talk about the hypnotic metaphor referencing everything I wanted. So right now I'm going to go ahead and talk about, just moving on. When I was hypnotized, the social worker tried to hypnotize me to think that death threats were funny and tried to hypnotize me to brag about getting multiple billionaire death threats because I must have been doing something very impressive to get multi-billionaire death threats. I was hypnotized to think death threats were funny, since threatening to kill a suicidal person could literally be laughable because it could actually encourage a suicidal person to do what they were threatened for doing if they wanted to die. It could just encourage the behavior even more. Which is why they threatened to torture me and kill my friends and family. The emphasis was put on multi-billionaire death threats because I was hypnotized to think that some multi-billionaires were willing to pay for multi-billion-dollar ransoms in exchange for a presidential exemption for criminal activity they were involved in. Like I said, this is extremely complicated. Watch till the end of the video to actually understand what's going on. So this goes into a little bit more depth here. To start, though, I also remember the social worker in Jordan Valley Medical Center that hypnotized me, telling me that Billie Eilish's name meant something specifically. I was hypnotized to think that Billie meant billionaire, because you can't pronounce billionaire without saying Billie, and that Eilish meant I wish, because they rhyme. I was hypnotized to think everything I wanted was a reference to how they told me that I was going to be able to go on NBC and talk about everything I wanted in a political sense. I was also hypnotized to think that in a hostage situation, everything I wanted meant that as long as I gave the captors everything they wanted for a ransom, that I would get everything I wanted in return, the hostages' safety. And everyone would get everything they wanted in the situation. Let's see here. So, there is definitely some more context here. Now, he starts talking about... Alright, so this one is a little bit different. I'll go ahead and start. This is referencing when he stated, "You can't get what you want unless what you want is to die for me." In an attempt to demoralize me, I was hypnotized. In an attempt to demoralize me, I was threatened for looking up to Jesus Christ as a role model. I am an atheist, although from a scientific and historical perspective, I looked up to Jesus Christ as a role model and wanted to be like him because of his unconditional love and selflessness, something that was admirable. I also looked up to George Washington, Abraham Lincoln, Buddha, and Mahatma Gandhi for similar principles and values, but I was only specifically threatened for looking up to Jesus as a role model, likely because it could, likely because it could be as could be used as a frightening example. Sorry about that. Since I noticed a lot of problems in society that are frequently discussed but not properly resolved, I strive to find political resolutions to these problems and apply them. I strive to rise above all the evil, greed, and corruption in the world so that I could help people and change the world. I was threatened that by doing this, I would be like Jesus Christ, because I would be acting like a savior by saving everyone from all the evil, greed, and corruption in the world. They're threatened that they wanted history to repeat itself if I was behaving Christ-like, because I could be like Jesus and, quote, die for their sins. This threat was an attempt to demoralize me by making me scared of looking up to Jesus Christ as a role model and behaving selflessly and morally. I was also hypnotized to think that if I tried to snitch, that the threat would reference Billie Eilish being Jesus dying for their sins, except the Spanish pronunciation Jesus, because they said they were going to use her as an example of what they would do to snitches, like how the Mexican cartel made examples of snitches by decapitating them using a chainsaw. I was also threatened that they were going to make me look bad for helping people and trying to do the right thing because they'd abused me so much. I'd make helping people and doing the right thing seem scary, and that they were going to use Billie Eilish as an example of what they do to people for trying to preserve the environment as well. The BECAUSE acronym that I mentioned earlier stood for Billie Eilish, Cartel, Anyone Useless Snitches Eventually. By implying useless, getting rid of, like if they're useless, well, we don't have any use for that person that snitches, so we can go ahead and get rid of them. moving on from that, there's more to that, but regardless, I'll go ahead and get started with continuing. When I was hypnotized, I was also told that my friend named Delaney wrote the Make-A-Wish Foundation for me and that Donald Trump responded to the letter. They told me Donald Trump was a multi-billionaire and that he was going to make all my wishes come true and give me everything I wanted for the Make-A-Wish Foundation. I was then told that the hypnosis was actually so that Donald Trump would get everything he wanted. The situation was compared to the cartoon The Simpsons, as if they were explaining it to a little kid by explaining it to me. They told me to imagine Mr. Burns, the owner of the power plant, wanting to get rid of the three-eyed fish that mutated from nuclear waste being illegally dumped in the local pond, and Mr. Burns wanting to keep the three-eyed fish off the news. Metaphorically speaking in the situation, Donald Trump was Mr. Burns and I was the fish, and my hyperventilation syndrome was the fish's third eye mutation that Mr. Burns wanted to keep off the news. To clarify, the hyperventilation syndrome doesn't normally seem like anything that significant, but the hyperventilation syndrome was so severe that I easily could have broken the world record for hyperventilation syndrome. I was consistently hyperventilating for 3 hours at a time, 3 times a day, every day for the first 9 months after it started, totaling 9 hours a day. The hyperventilation syndrome was triggered by singular words and even specific colors. I oftentimes was completely unable to leave my house and sometimes even my room for 1 to 2 days at a time. Whenever I did go in public, specifically grocery shopping, I would have people call ambulances on me and end up in the emergency room on a regular basis. I was also hypnotized to think the Make-A-Wish Foundation would give me everything I wanted but not everything I needed, because the Make-A-Wish Foundation could give a cancer patient what they wanted but not what they needed, like a cure for cancer. I was hypnotized to think that the doctors would only give me Valium or Klonopin if I said I want Valium or I want Klonopin, and that if I said I needed it, that the doctors weren't going to give it to me. I was hypnotized to think the reasons the doctors wouldn't give me the medications if I said I needed it is because I would make the Make-A-Wish Foundation seem scary, because they wanted people to feel good for me since I got what I wanted, instead of people feeling bad for me because I needed my medications, and because they needed to cover up my PTSD symptoms and make it look like drug addiction, because no one wants to see a movie about someone needing medicine. In all reality, this was done so that I could be abused and deprived of what I needed, as well as to make it look like I didn't need my medications. So, let's see here. I will elaborate. This really kind of goes around in a lot of circles. It sounds fairly confusing, almost completely irrelevant to the letter content, right? That's what I mean by having the entire context and understanding of the situation. A lot of what I described was mostly just context, few metaphors, mostly just context, and then there's also nested loops of the metaphors. So this is a specific hypnotic metaphor regarding Valium, the tranquilizer medication. When I was in jail, before I entered a plea arraignment, I was hypnotized to think if I wanted the judge to sentence the time over my head at court, that I should draw an arm over the head of the stick figure climbing the mountain that I was hypnotized to draw in jail, and plead no contest at court, and that the message would go right over little Billie's head, and that the stick figure was little Billie. Now, to clarify a little bit more context that I forgot to include, they framed me with hypnosis. That was the entire point of this entire operation, as a method of keeping me from going on the news for being abused and being abused and gaslighted by doctors and therapists and psychiatrists, and developing world record-breaking hyperventilation syndrome from it. So, when I was in jail, before I entered a plea arraignment, I was hypnotized to think if I wanted the judge to sentence the time over my head, which by that, what that means is that at sentencing, the judge would release an individual from jail and sentence the time over their head. So if they say, for example, they could sentence a person to 1 year over their head, and if they violate their probation or make another mistake, they are released from jail with the time over their head, and if they make a mistake, then the time that is over their head is now sentenced, and they have to do that time then. So it's kind of like a second chance type of thing. So, when I was in jail, before I entered a plea out arraignment, I was hypnotized to think if I wanted the judge to sentence the time over my head at court, that I should draw an arm over the head of the stick figure climbing the mountain and plead no contest at court, and that the message would go right over little Billie's head, and that the stick figure was little Billie. I was also hypnotized to think that the mountains meant Intermountain Healthcare, and that I had a contract with the CEO of Intermountain Healthcare where he would give me half of the healthcare company as long as I didn't sue or talk about medical malpractice. And all I had to do was go to Intermountain Healthcare after I got out of jail and ask for Valium. I was hypnotized to feel like the hypnosis was like a game show and that I'd win prizes when I did what they wanted me to, because I was hypnotized by the Make-A-Wish Foundation. Make-A-Wish Foundation is like, you can have anything you want. It's almost kind of like a game show, like you're winning things, whatever, right? Kind of similar. I was also hypnotized to think that since I was making a movie, that if I went to the hospital, that I needed to ask for Klonopin if I was going to make a movie scene, and that I needed to ask for Valium for an emergency medical intermission for my movie, so that I could get actual medical care. So to clarify here, what this was a hypnotic metaphor, and I have explained this before, but basically the concept is, to dissociate from the situation, right? So I was hypnotized to draw the stick figure, climbing a little mountain, right? The mountain represented like me trying to get healthcare, and then to dissociate me from that, it's like a double dissociation. So dissociating means, separating myself from the situation. So that's just like a drawing, right? It's a metaphor. That's a first level dissociation. Second level dissociation was from calling the stick figure Billie instead of me. And then, the concept was, if I wanted to get out of jail and get health care, then all I had to do was plead no contest. That was the post-hypnotic suggestion or the hypnotic command that they gave me and cued and elicited without me being able to consciously detect it, to plead no contest at court. While my conscious attention was mostly distracted by the metaphor, and consciously distracted and entertained by the metaphor and the story and the drawings and, what everything else was telling me, right? And then all the other rewards that they told me that the Intermountain CEO was going to do for me, and that all I had to do was go to Intermountain Healthcare and ask them for Valium, and that I would become the CEO of the hospital, and everything along those lines. So, you can understand the concept's a little bit confusing. The hypnosis inhibited my ability to speak during this, and, I had to repeat myself multiple times because of the hypnosis. So I'm pointing that out. The hypnosis being used to try to prevent me from people from watching my videos. So please make sure to watch my video, because if somebody's going that far out of their way just to stop me from being able to make the video something that people would want to watch, then that sounds like it's pretty important to understand. Then also, they also implied that the message would go right over little Billie's head, and that was used to confuse me, right? So, and I was hypnotized to think that little Billie represented, like in a metaphorical sense, very similar to So little Billie actually was supposed to imply, like, since Billie Eilish makes music and a lot of her fans are actually children, well, I mean, it's kind of like those fans are little Billies, right? And the message going over the children's heads, because they don't understand what hypnosis is or how it works necessarily. And so, like with a metaphor or a story, you can, I explained this earlier, but basically you tell a story, and while you're consciously distracted and entertained by that story, they can slip in a hypnotic command, tell you something to do as part of the story, and then you don't recognize it because you're too entertained and distracted by the story to notice that they just hypnotized you to do something. Which is pretty scary. Now, I also wanted to clarify, and then by saying, and then that the message would go right over little Billie's head, right? Because this was to make me plead no contest in court, and that was the message that was going over my head, and I was hypnotized to think that the message was going over just your average little kid's head, that like little Billie as a metaphor, kind of like how John Doe's used to describe an anonymous male, or Jane Doe is used to describe an anonymous female or woman. Well, little Billie was kind of like a metaphor describing like just an anonymous little kid that would be watching the movie for the Make-A-Wish Foundation that I would be making. And they didn't want, and I was hypnotized to think that they didn't want, the little children to think, oh no, Matt is being abused and tortured in the jail because they're refusing to give him the medical care that he needs. And, it's a violation of unconstitutional rights, and it is, cruel and unusual punishment by definition. So hopefully the jail gets shut down because of that, first of all, and then we can go ahead and make some changes in our criminal justice system to make sure that we actually help a lot of these people and criminals actually recover, because nobody's perfect. A lot of people will make mistakes. Some people will occasionally break the law. Most people, of course, are law-abiding, but a lot of people, there is hope for them to be able to recover, and they do have rights. So, moving on from that. And then that was also done. Another hypnotic command too was, I would become, with the metaphor, talking about how the metaphor and the lie too, that the CEO of Intermountain Healthcare would give me half of the healthcare company as long as I didn't sue or talk about medical malpractice. Sorry about that. I hypnotized you on right now. That is, as long as I didn't sue or talk about medical malpractice, that is another hypnotic command that they slipped in there. Because they didn't want me to sue or talk about medical malpractice. So, that's what that was. And then I'm also going to go over some sexual threats and explanation here. I was also given a series of sexual threats towards my reproductive health and reproductive organs, that they were going to give me sexually transmitted diseases for being political. So, due to the threats of contracting STDs, I was hypnotized to think that if I went to the hospital to get tested for STDs, that I was supposed to ask for one of the medications, Klonopin or Valium. I was hypnotized to think that the two different medications meant different things without knowing what they were supposed to mean, as a method of confusion and to distract my conscious attention away from the reality of the situation. I was hypnotized to think that the medical care I received would be more dependent on which medication I chose to ask for than the actual test results. I was hypnotized to think that Klonopin meant I was making a movie scene, and I was hypnotized to think that Valium meant an emergency medical intermission for my movie, and to not know what they were supposed to mean until I moved out of Colorado, and to think that I could only get an emergency medical intervention for my movie in the state of Colorado. I was also hypnotized to think that asking for Valium or Klonopin also meant multiple other different things to elicit confusion and to prevent me from pleading not guilty and going to trial for the assault charges I was framed for. I was hypnotized to think I could only be given STDs I wasn't tested for during the movie, and that if I got tested for an STD during the movie, that I couldn't be given that STD in the movie. Worsening metaphorical threats were cued the more I insisted on getting a comprehensive STD screening, as a form of punishment for attempting to think rationally and logically, based off the rules that they told me, right? Well, I don't want to get any STD, so I want to get tested for everything, right? I was hypnotized to think that telling the doctors I needed to get tested meant I was only trying to get tested for one STD, and it meant I was going to have a girl test me for sexually transmitted diseases by having sexual intercourse with me. Sounds ridiculous, right? But it was supposed to be like a sexual themed movie, like, oh, there's nothing wrong with them, you know, like whatever, kind of like a joke type of thing, right? A metaphor, like, oh, she's testing me, right? Seems fine. Anyways, so I was hypnotized to think that if I said I needed to get checked for STDs, that it meant I was trying to get tested for a few different STDs, and that I was fighting the hypnosis, and to imagine it was like playing a game of chess, because they just put me in check. And that I would be fighting any girl that would be trying to test me for STDs by having sexual intercourse with me. I was hypnotized to think that if I said I needed to be screened for STDs, that I was trying to get tested for all the different sexually transmitted diseases, and that I was going to be screened by putting me in a latex condom because they were going to give me too many sexually transmitted diseases to ever be able to have sexual intercourse without a condom ever again in my life. Because, you know, like a screen, kind of like a, I remember also, like, kind of like the concept of, like, Toy Story, where they're in that plastic wrap packaging. Well, like, being hypnotized to kind of, like, feel like that, right? And to think of this, like, I need to be screened, right? Something in front of my face. Anyways, so, moving on. This is going to elaborate a little bit more on the post-hypnotic suggestions and metaphors relating to the Valium and Klonopin. So, Valium scripts, I need something longer lasting, and I didn't know. Also, how that involved the medical malpractice script. The CEO of Intermountain Healthcare made a deal with me that if I didn't talk about medical malpractice, that he would give me 50% of the company, and that all I had to do was go to the hospital and ask for Valium. Valium, Haley Mathers told me that Haley Mathers was supposed to make the Make-A-Wish Foundation seem less scary. And that supposedly, it was like a contract with her to try to make the Make-A-Wish Foundation seem less scary. Valium, emergency medical intermission in my movie so that I could get actual medical care. I was hypnotized to think that was what Valium meant. Klonopin, I was hypnotized to think meant like a movie scene. Klonopin, it's not my fault. Delaney. There was also another one. So if I moved back out to Arkansas and went to Unity Health emergency room, I was hypnotized to go in there and it was like difficult to describe. It was really easy for me to understand, but the hypnosis inhibits my ability to explain it to other people, right? So, just like the incomplete metaphor concept, trying to make me look insane, because then because then none of the metaphors make sense. They're incomplete. But anyway, so I was supposed to go into Unity Health and like dragging my feet, like it's not my fault. I need Klonopin, and it was supposed to mean I need Klonopin more than I need Delaney. And they really hypnotized me to think that like this girl Delaney was like obsessed with me, and that like all these different things, when she wrote the Make-A-Wish Foundation for me and everything along those lines, and I was like, whoa, you know what I'm saying? Like, a little bit like too much, right? Well, anyways, so jail, court, police scripts, guilty. Okay, and then I was hypnotized to think that, alright, if I pled guilty, Delaney would feel guilty for not sleeping with me. If I pled not guilty, Delaney would not feel guilty for sleeping with me. If I pled no contest, I would choose Delaney no contest. And I was hypnotized to think that no contest was the best option for me to plea, blah, 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 right? And going along with the Intermountain type of thing, too. Anyways, so I was literally actually believing that I was making a movie when I was in jail and through the entire court process. That's how they got me to do that. I wanted to withdraw my plea afterwards when I found out that, I was lied to, and, like, more about hypnosis, right? How much I was actually being abused with hypnosis, and, yeah. Anyways, also, so I was also hypnotized to think that Bear River Mental Health had a contract where they would give me mental health court. Because Bear River Mental Health is the mental health authority and Cache County, and the jail that they framed me to have me incarcerated in was Cache County Sheriff's Office. They don't prescribe any controlled medications in the jail either, by the way. That's what I meant by cruel and unusual punishment, because they don't provide people medicines that they actually need in the jail out of policy. So, it can be very cruel and unusual punishment because they're denying medical care and options for individuals as a result of punishment. So, by definition, denying a person medical care is cruel and unusual punishment. So, Bear River Mental Health Court contract. In order to avoid a multi-million-dollar medical malpractice lawsuit, Bear River would give me mental health court to get me out of jail so that I wouldn't have to break my legs just to go to the hospital to get my medications, since they don't prescribe controlled substances in the jail. Hypnotized to imagine a Klonopin pill being the bear from the Jungle Book, making me feel comforted going to court, because the bear, technically, Bear River Mental Health, would give me mental health court to get me out of jail and keep me from breaking my legs for medications. Probation court contract. I was also hypnotized to think that probation had a contract. Probation would let me out of jail on probation as long as I didn't shut down the jail. And they hypnotized me to think that it was because they didn't want to make probation look bad for putting people in jail because of medical marijuana and for people needing medicine, and them putting people in jail for needing medicine. And that as long as they didn't shut down the jail, that probation would have a jail to send me and other people to. Because if I shut down the jail in Cache County Sheriff's Office, and then, they would have to, for example, transport any inmates down to Brigham City to go to jail. That's what they would have to do. And I'm not opposed to doing that to them. I was hypnotized to draw different medications that were each supposed to represent specific things. I was also hypnotized to draw mountains and stairs, which also had very specific meanings. I was hypnotized to think drawing Klonopin pills meant I had a contract with Bear River Mental Health, and that I could get mental health court to get me out of jail, and to prevent a very serious medical malpractice lawsuit, since Bear River Mental Health wouldn't give me my medications while in jail. I was hypnotized to think the Klonopin represented Bear River Mental Health because Bear River Mental Health used to prescribe me Klonopin. To further elaborate on what that meant. And and it would result in an extremely serious lawsuit if I had to jump off a flight of stairs, break my legs, and hospitalize myself because Bureau of Mental Health wouldn't give me medications in jail. I was hypnotized to imagine that if I got approved for Bureau of Mental Health court, it would be like I'd be going to court with a bear named Baloo from the movie The Jungle Book protecting me from breaking my legs because Bureau of Mental Health would let me out of jail. I was also hypnotized to imagine the bottom pencil stroke and the letter K inscriptions on the Klonopin pill were legs, and that if I didn't get approved from Bureau of Mental Health court that the legs were broken. I was also hypnotized to think that the reason Bureau of Mental Health wanted to prevent me from breaking my legs was because if I broke my spinal cord on an accident jumping off a flight of stairs, I could become paralyzed for the rest of my life, and the lawsuit could cost Bureau of Mental Health $300 million. I think I was also hypnotized to remember the amount of $300 million by adding a 0 to the number inscription on the Adderall pill I was hypnotized to draw, which was 30. So moving on from that, I was hypnotized to think drawing Valium pills meant I had a contract with Intermountain Healthcare for a discrete medical malpractice settlement agreement. I was hypnotized to draw a little stick figure. Sorry about that, hypnosis, and hitting my ability to speak. I was hypnotized to draw a little stick figure climbing a mountain, and I was hypnotized to think that if I wanted the jail time to be sentenced over my head so that I could be released from the jail, that I should draw a little arm over the stick figure's head. I was hypnotized to think the mountains meant Intermountain Healthcare, and that the stick figure climbing the mountain was me trying to get healthcare. I was hypnotized to think that if I actually had medical malpractice and if I wanted healthcare, that as long as I didn't sue him or talk about anything related to medical malpractice, that I could plead no contest in court and get the jail time sentenced over my head so that I could go to the hospital to get healthcare, and that he would give me 50% of the company, and all that I had to do was ask for Valium in the emergency room. I was also hypnotized to think that the message goes right over little Billie's head after drawing the little arm over the stick figure's head, and that the stick figure was little Billie. This was done because the metaphor itself is a hypnotic suggestion implying that if I wanted or needed to get healthcare, that I needed to plead no contest in court and also not to talk about medical malpractice or to sue Intermountain Healthcare. And the stick figure was named Little Billie just to confuse me so that I wouldn't know I was being deceived. In this context, I was hypnotized to think Little Billie was a metaphor referring to a young child that would be watching the movie about me produced by the Make-A-Wish Foundation, similar to how John Doe is a commonly used metaphor to reference a male's name, and how Jane Doe is a commonly used metaphor to reference a female's name. The metaphor was used to make me believe that unfortunate circumstances that I couldn't get the medical care I needed in jail would go right over little Billie's head, so that I wouldn't portray the image that the Make-A-Wish Foundation was scary as a method of instilling the belief that the message would be going over someone else's head and not mine. Okay, and then quality over quantity. I was told that every time I went grocery shopping or went out to eat that I was making commercials. I was told that Donald Trump had a contract with the Make-A-Wish Foundation where every dollar sorry about that, I'll start over. I was told that Donald Trump had a contract with the Make-A-Wish Foundation where every dollar that I spent, Donald Trump had to spend $1 million to pay for the movie production and commercial. I was also told that COVID-19 was a zombie apocalypse theme for my movie, and that the COVID-19 stimulus bills were funding my movie production. The social worker told me that hypnotized me in Jordan Valley Medical Center financially. Sorry about that. The social worker that hypnotized me in Jordan Valley Medical Center financially exploited me by telling me that America's economy is based off products valuing quality over quantity, and that every product I'd buy would be sponsored by the company that made it, and that I needed to buy brand name products and to advertise for them, which is obviously financial exploitation because brand name products are more expensive than generics. The social worker also told me that I had a Roche sponsorship and that Roche was going to let me advertise Valium and Klonopin as high-quality pharmaceuticals in comparison to Xanax by Pfizer, which is FDA approved in stronger doses and available in a larger quantity as a tranquilizer than Valium and Klonopin are FDA approved for. The social worker also told me that the cooks at Jordan Valley Medical Center really prided themselves on the quality of the food, that they cooked and that I was supposed to go back there and ask for Valium. The social worker told me that the sooner I went back to Jordan Valley Medical Center, that it meant the better their food was supposed to taste and that their food was supposed to taste as good as I do, because all the girls want to eat me up. So the better their food was, the better I was. I was also not supposed to mention Adderall in court, and I was told that if the judge asked about the Adderall, I was supposed to say Jordan Valley Medical Center has the best food in the world, guilty as charged, which was supposed to mean girls want to eat me up more than anyone else in the world, guilty as charged. I was hypnotized to think I had a Roche sponsorship for drawing the Klonopin and Valium on the postcard, which I explained in further detail in Hypnosis and Drawings. And to reinforce the belief, I was also told that Roche was going to help me patent the nootropic supplements. I wanted to get approved through the FDA, which is why I was hypnotized to write Nootrop Shop at the bottom of the postcards as well. And then, let's see here. So, further evidence, I was hypnotized and framed as seen as in these Instagram messages, because the Instagram messages were all dated on May 1st, 2020, several months before the date of the assault allegations I was framed for. This invalidates any claims or accusations that I was being dishonest regarding being hypnotized as an attempt to get out of court. So, let me see here. I also wanted to include, before I get too far, right? So what the emergency medical intermission for the movie was supposed to mean. Well, they used hypnosis to control bodily functions to improve acting performance, such as suppressing cough reflex, mucus production, tear production, controlling salivation, etc. Because they hypnotized me to think the movie was being recorded live and that coughing could ruin a movie scene, for example, or suppressing my thirst and hunger while making movie scenes, because they didn't want me to interrupt my movie scenes by getting food or water. And I will elaborate even further detail on that. I was hypnotized not to drink water, though, basically, unless I noticed I wasn't drinking enough water, unless someone else noticed I wasn't drinking enough water, or unless they would get caught for it. And I developed a, form of loss of organ function as a result of that. So I have some Instagram messages to a variety of celebrities here. So you can see this one is to G-Eazy. I was told that the movie that I was going to be making was with G-Eazy specifically. And you can see here the message on May 1st. What do I have to do to wake up? Do I just go back to a Colorado emergency room and tell them I want Valium so I can get emergency medical care? So, anyways, that was G-Eazy's profile picture on Instagram at the time. That was on the 28th that I printed that off of, 28th of April. This one has Billie Eilish on it, as you can see. And then, actually a couple different messages. This one also includes something about, let me see, hope someone can help me find hope in our medical system. Medical malpractice will be the death of me. That's comforting. But also you can see, what do I have to do to wake up? Do I just go back to a Colorado ER and tell them I want Valium so I can get emergency medical care? Let me see. And then Haley Jade. This is Eminem's daughter, or Haley Mathers, as she's also known as. So as you can see here, that's her Instagram. And same date, same message. What do I have to do to wake up? Do I just go back to Colorado emergency room and tell them I want Valium so I can get emergency medical care? So as you can see, like I explained earlier there, that's what's going on. That's what I was hypnotized to think was going on. So here's Will Smith. I also messaged him. He's an actor, right? Like a movie actor, movie star. So you can see here, what do I have to do to wake up? Do I just go back to a Colorado emergency room and tell them I want Valium so I can get emergency medical care? Christine Price is also the individual that first hypnotized me. She was a therapist that I was seeing that was abusing me, and then she hypnotized me. Then I also messaged another celebrity named Joyner Lucas on Instagram. This was the same date, I believe. What do I have to do to wake up? Do I just go back to a Colorado emergency room and tell them I want Valium so I can get emergency medical care? And then Halsey, another celebrity. So you can see here. So I was told that all these people were involved in like the movie and everything along those lines. By the way. So what do I have to do to wake up? Do I just go back to a Colorado emergency room and tell them I want Valium so I can get emergency medical care? And then you can see reference Christine Price again. And then here is Eminem, or Marshall Mathers. His legal name. So, Marshall Mathers, and then I actually also include here, I want to write you a letter because these doctors are making me extremely suicidal, and this whole movie production is turning my health into a joke. Further evidence that I was like that just clarifies further context of everything that I was saying, right? Like movie production, turning my health into a joke. I didn't even know that I included that I sent that message to Eminem before, right? So, anyways, that's on the same date too, May 1st, 2020, for both of these. Is turning my health into a joke. At this rate, I would just want nothing. And I intended to say, but to die. I'm only human, dude. So, you know, like, I was suicidal. Oh, but the second message, sorry about that. What do I have to do to wake up? Do I just go back to a Colorado emergency room and tell them I want Valium so I can get emergency medical care? So, anyways, Eminem, Marshall Mathers has both of those names on there. I didn't notice that Marshall Mathers at the top, Eminem in the middle. Let's see. So, next up, also I just wanted to clarify, why else would I ask, what do I have to do to wake up if it wasn't pertaining to waking up from hypnosis? Further evidence is in the wording of the messages, I want Valium. So, yeah, and of course, I'm pretty sure that I clarified this part. This invalidates any claims or accusations that I was being dishonest regarding being hypnotized as an attempt to get out of court. So I began folding and rolling a raw cigarette filter to roll a joint, and it was a cue to think, no, Matt, don't do that, that lets it out. I felt confused, ignored the suggestion, and this is called Charlie Sheen Has AIDS, and then it relates a lot of the different other references and things that he's saying throughout the letters. This kind of ties a lot of this all together, right? I began folding and rolling a raw cigarette filter to roll a joint, and it was a cue to think, no, Matt, don't do that, that lets it out. I felt confused, ignored the suggestion, and proceeded to finish rolling the crutch anyways. As I proceeded to finish rolling the crutch, I was cued to think, wait, Matt, Charlie Sheen has AIDS. To which I responded with even more confusion, thinking, what does that have to do with anything? And proceeded to attempt to finish rolling the crutch. Again, next, I was cued to think, wait, Matt, Charlie Sheen has AIDS. Or in other words, Charlie Sheen, or in other words, if anyone finds out, he can hire a big man to break your legs. And was then cued to think, wait, Matt, Charlie Sheen is affiliated with cartels. and thought logically about how Charlie Sheen is very notorious for his cocaine use, and that he very possibly could obtain cocaine from the Mexican cartel and could very possibly have connections to people who could break people's kneecaps or legs, because I recalled a memory of my mother telling me how my dad was hanging out with people who broke people's kneecaps, and this was a very similar analogy to a South Park episode where Jared, who used to advertise for Subway commercials, admitted that it wasn't just Subway sandwiches that helped him lose weight, and that he actually got AIDS to help him lose weight, which implied that he meant the medical condition, but he actually had assistants who aided him. It's a metaphor, also like kind of like a joke or a pun. So a dietitian and a fitness trainer aid him to lose weight. As a method of manipulating my behavior, I was cued to think that Charlie Sheen was going to break my legs for acting scared and hyperventilating because of his AIDS, because it would make his sex life seem scary, as well as how acting scared and hyperventilating was bad acting for my movie, or that my acting was diseased. They also hypnotized me to think that if I acted scared of Charlie Sheen's AIDS, that it was like putting Charlie Sheen in a condom, because it would make girls scared of contracting AIDS from him, and that Charlie Sheen's AIDS were going to break my legs if I put him in a condom. I was hypnotized to think that this was an attempt to help me improve my diseased acting for my movie, because hyperventilating was diseased acting. Due to the abuse and threats I experienced from the hypnosis, I was very scared of G-Eazy, and I was hypnotized to think that G-Eazy was also threatening to break my legs if I made his music seem scary. And I was also hypnotized to think G-Eazy was a gangster while listening to the These Things Happen album, in an attempt to make him appear more scary and to deter me from listening to his music, because they wanted me to think that he was threatening me for listening to his music and being scared of him. I was hypnotized to think that if I didn't drink, do drugs, and party, that my sex life would be a comedy, and that if I didn't drink and do drugs for fun, or used alcohol or drugs to self-medicate my medical conditions, that my sex life would be a comedy, because nobody wants to see a movie about someone taking medicine for medical conditions. I was hypnotized to think that if I had to drink at least one beer every day in public, or G-Eazy would break my legs, and what that meant was like that I was supposed to have like a beer sponsorship. Anyways. So I guess I'll start from here, because there's a part that I'm going to be excluding, and I'm going to explain the entirety in another video where I explain the entire Make-A-Wish Foundation story. Because the movie that they told me that I was making had a plot and everything along those lines. Very interesting, but they hypnotized me to think that if I needed the police to protect me from G-Eazy, and if what the police were already doing in Logan wasn't enough, that the only way they'd be able to protect me was by putting me in jail in an attempt to keep me from going to the police, because they hypnotized me to think that I was already famous and that the police already knew the situation, and that the only way they could protect me from getting diseased was by putting me in jail. And they hypnotized me to think that jail was a condom because it was protection. I remember after going to jail that Christine Price warned me to not wear a mask, because if I wore a mask, it meant that the doctors I had medical malpractice against were telling me that you can't sleep with Delaney, and that I wasn't supposed to let them tell me that. When I was in jail, they wouldn't give me my meds because they don't prescribe any controlled substances in jail, and I was hypnotized to think that if I didn't stop hyperventilating, start smiling, and hold my hands in a ball in front of the jail cell door, that my legs were going to be broken without knowing what it even meant, or why I did it out of fear. This was used to treat my hyperventilation syndrome and PTSD, as well as prevent me from breaking my legs to get my medications while I was in jail. Because if I broke my legs just to go to the hospital so that they could give me the medications I needed, it would have been inevitable for me to have a medical malpractice lawsuit against the jail, and that I would be breaking the jail by breaking my legs. because the jail could even get shut down from the lawsuit if the news got out that they are denying necessary medical care to inmates in the jail, and they didn't want that to happen, so they used that as a therapy to treat my PTSD, so I couldn't get medical malpractice from it and shut down the jail. Sorry about that. The hypnosis really inhibited my ability to read just barely. When I started reading the entire duration as age thing. Sorry about that. I also remember Christine Price told me that the doctors hoped that I also remember Christine Price told me that the doctors hoped that I would break my legs and become crippled like my dog did when I was experiencing catalepsy from sleep deprivation after being taken off my sleeping medication, Ambien. I was hypnotized to hold my hands on a ball for 3 hours straight one day, and I didn't know why, but I did it anyways, due to the threats of the post-hypnotic suggestions. And I was hypnotized to think the ball represented a benzo and that I had to hold it for 3 hours straight because of how I used to hyperventilate for 3 hours at a time as an example of how much I actually needed my medications. Alright, so, and then in here, a benzo is a shortened term used to, oh, by the way, let me clarify. So the ball that I was hypnotized to hold my hands in, right, was like this. So I was hypnotized to do this, smile, and stare at the camera in the jail. I was terrified while doing this, right? Like, they're going to break my legs, right? Like, I don't know what to do. You know what I'm saying? So it was just kind of like very confusing because they used incomplete metaphors that were missing context to understand, and then the metaphor would be completed later and cued later to explain the situation or the threat that they used against me. So, a benzo is a shortened term used to refer to a type of medication called a benzodiazepine, which is a type of tranquilizer. I was also hypnotized to think that holding my hands on a ball for 3 hours straight meant I was holding the world record for hyperventilation syndrome. This actually successfully treated my hyperventilation syndrome and PTSD because the fear of breaking my legs from the hyperventilation syndrome and PTSD overpowered the fear caused by my PTSD, using fear to overcome fear. I was hypnotized to hold my hands in a ball behind my head and to shake my hands as if shaking a snow globe because it was supposed to mean I was going to sue Intermountain Healthcare for medical malpractice and that I was, quote, shaking the world up, end quote, because I was, quote, shaking down the hospital for money, end quote, and to imagine an earthquake happening at the hospital that I would be shaking down and a lawsuit for money and to imagine the hospital in a snow globe. This was the hypnotic metaphor relating the references of earthquakes to snow globes. I was also hypnotized to think that the ball represented a bird trapped in a bird cage, which was a metaphor for me being in a jail cell, and that putting the jail over my head was like putting the jail time over my head so that I wouldn't break my legs in jail for medications. Which is why the ball was also supposed to be a benzo. The hypnotic metaphor also references the suggestions relating to quality over quantity, and the hypnotic drawing with little Billie climbing the mountain for healthcare and pleading no contest to get out of jail for Valium, and the message going right over little Billie's head. I was hypnotized to think I needed to smile and look at the camera holding the ball in my hands because it was part of my movie, and the movie scenes were supposed to be time-lapse videos or fast-motion videos similar to time-lapse videos of seasons changing, the sun rising and setting, or even weather changes on a weather radar over extended periods of time by speeding up the frame rate of the videos by various multitudes. So the hypnosis, I was also hypnotized not to pay attention to what I was reading just barely, by the way, too. So, kind of reading it on autopilot because I'm being tortured and abused with hypnosis. I was also hypnotized to think that holding my hands in a ball represented a snow globe because I was hypnotized to think of weather changes in a time-lapse video in order to imagine how the movie scenes I was making in the jail would look. I was hypnotized to think that as soon as I actually broke the news, okay. And let's see, so this is where there's supposed to be a period, which pencil right now to go ahead and put that there, but oh well. I was hypnotized to think that as soon as I actually broke the news that my family, friends, and loved ones would actually be in danger, I was hypnotized to think that the news would be unsettling and would be shaking the world up, as if the references to earthquakes in the letters specifically pertained to this. I was hypnotized to think the unsettling news referenced unsettled medical malpractice lawsuits. I was also hypnotized to think that water rising meant Bear River Mental Health was flooded with phone calls about me, and that there would be waves of phone calls in medical malpractice cases like there are waves in the ocean, referencing the song Ocean Eyes by Billie Eilish, because I was hypnotized to think the song meant my dog, Jewel, sorry about that, kind of like a gem, like a ruby or a diamond, because she has 2 different colored eyes. And the waves of phone calls and lawsuits would be about how the medical malpractice lawsuit was so blatantly cruel, abusive, and unethical that even my dog became injured from it. Another form of metaphor for Charlie Sheen has AIDS was that there are medications that can help with a medical condition, AIDS. And since the medications are helpful, the medications are like AIDS for AIDS, and that since my medications helped me, Charlie Sheen has AIDS meant I had AIDS, since I had my medications. I was hypnotized to think that since AIDS were a form of help, like hearing aids, and that since the hypnotic metaphor was used to help my PTSD and hyperventilation syndrome, that the hypnotist gave me AIDS with using hypnosis because they helped me with my medical conditions. I was also hypnotized to think that Charlie Sheen has AIDS was a reference to how I believe that the meaning of life is to help people, and that the speech I wrote regarding oxytocin and the meaning of life was like an STD because it was a, quote, moral oral, end quote, presentation, and to prevent my videos from going viral, they had to inhibit my ability to speak. I was also hypnotized to think that if I had any viral videos, they'd be like cancer to the doctors because the doctors would try to stop the videos from spreading. And I was hypnotized to think suing doctors meant killing doctors. I was hypnotized to think holding my hands in a ball meant I had the world in my hands, as if holding a globe, and to think that holding my hands in a ball was also a reference to how on the cartoon show The Simpsons, the character Mr. Burns would hold his hands together in a ball and say, excellent. Right? Just a little bit different. I was also hypnotized to think the world and Mr. Burns metaphor was a reference to Donald Trump feeling excellent for preventing me from becoming famous for breaking the world record for hyperventilation syndrome. I was also hypnotized to think the world and Mr. Burns' metaphor also referenced environmental preservation because I intended to make, apply, and enforce the actual changes necessary to preserve the environment and address the climate crisis, as well as because Mr. Burns was depicted as greedy, corrupt, evil, and illegally dumping nuclear waste from his nuclear power plant into local lakes and ponds. Sorry about that. The hypnosis is abusing me right now. I'm trying to speak, and the hypnosis is being used to abuse me. While I was hypnotized, I explained I wanted to rise above all the evil, greed, and corruption in the world so that I could save the world and help people, and that the way I would literally save the world was by preserving the environment. I was also hypnotized to think that due to limited fossil fuels and overconsumption of fossil fuels, that we are facing an inevitability of eventually needing to limit fossil fuel consumption, and that the earlier we started, the easier it would be for society in the future. Christine Price told me that all the evil, greedy, and corrupt politicians and business owners wanted to keep doing what they were doing, didn't care if what they were doing was harmful to the environment or not, because they were profiting off of it, and they didn't want the profits from their businesses limited because of fossil fuel consumption limitations and restrictions. So they hypnotized me to stop me so that they didn't have to. When I was hypnotized, I was given a series of different threats, since death threats only encouraged me because I was suicidal. The sexual threats mostly pertain to giving me STDs, organ failure, loss of organ function, and various threats towards my reproductive health, since I was rather politically progressive and wanted to make changes to improve our government, society. I was told that Donald Trump was a Republican and didn't want to change anything, that he wanted everything to stay the same, and that since my reproductive organs were healthy, that my reproductive organs didn't need to change, and that the more I wanted to change the world, the more they were going to change my reproductive organs and make them unhealthy. I was told that since Ziggy Marley's music inspired me to change the world, that they coined the term from the Ziggy Marley song, Change Your World, because the more I wanted to change the world, the more they were going to change my world by changing my reproductive health. I was told that the Make-A-Wish Foundation was willing to help me make a movie to compensate me for my PTSD and hyperventilation syndrome as long as I didn't make a YouTube channel and as long as I didn't file a medical malpractice lawsuit, because the Make-A-Wish Foundation does a lot of charitable work for children with terminally ill medical conditions. I was told that they needed to make me look mentally ill so that the public wouldn't find out my hyperventilation syndrome was caused by PTSD, abuse, and medical malpractice, so that the message would go right over little Billie's head and children wouldn't be scared of doctors and hospitals. I was told I was supposed to act bipolar, party, and do a lot of drugs and spend a lot of money very quickly to cover up my hyperventilation syndrome. I was threatened for making a YouTube channel, needing my medications, acting scared, hyperventilating, or letting anyone find out I was being abused. I was threatened that the scarier I made the doctors and hospitals seem, the scarier I made the Make-A-Wish Foundation seem. I was threatened that the scarier I made the Make-A-Wish Foundation seem, the scarier they were going to make my sex life seem, and I was given a series of threats towards my reproductive health, which were mostly threats to give me sexually transmitted diseases for hyperventilating and acting scared. When I was hypnotized, they organized for me to meet certain people in certain places so that I could be unknowingly and involuntarily forced to contract 8 different sexually transmitted infections without being sexually active. It was 4. I don't know why I wrote 8. And repressing my memory of it. So anyways, by the way, I was hypnotized to feel back pain too, to try to prevent me from speaking very clearly, by the way. I'm being tortured with hypnosis, so. I contracted all 4 sexually transmitted infections in a matter of only a few months. The first sexually transmitted infection I contracted was a rare strain of human papillomavirus, which is a form of warts on the back of my hands from shaking hands with a specific person they organized me to meet. The second sexually transmitted infection I contracted from a motel room they organized me to stay in afterwards. The third sexually transmitted infection I contracted was syphilis, which I believe I contracted after meeting someone they organized me to meet in Colorado. The second one was gonorrhea, by the way. Sorry about that. So then the third sexually transmitted infection I contracted was syphilis, which I believe I contracted after meeting someone that organized me to meet in Colorado. He gave me some Xanax for my hyperventilation syndrome symptoms and began repeatedly asking me to take off my pants throughout the night. The Xanax made me fall asleep in his car, and the next day I went to an urgent care clinic to get checked for a red bump that suddenly appeared on my skin. The last sexually transmitted infection I contracted was MRSA, or a form of staph, also known as a staph infection, which could have been premeditated using a variety of different methods. I was made to believe I was hypnotized to repress certain biological functions to improve my acting performance so that I wouldn't question the changes in my biological functions. An example of this was instilling the belief that my senses of thirst and hunger were being repressed so that I wouldn't interrupt my movie scenes to get food or water. I was hypnotized not to drink water unless I noticed I wasn't drinking enough water, unless someone else noticed I wasn't drinking enough water, or unless they would get caught for it. I developed a condition called urinary incontinence, which is a loss of bladder function that I developed as a result of being hypnotized to not drink water. The urinary incontinence impaired my reproductive health and sexual health as a method of instilling fear and intimidation to reduce resistance to post-hypnotic suggestions. I was also given various other threats towards my reproductive and sexual health. I was hypnotized to increase the frequency I smoked cigarettes, and I was told that my mucosal production and cough reflex were being repressed from my movie production. I was made to believe that the repressed mucosal production and cough reflex increased my risk of developing lung cancer and lung disease. I used to suffer from very severe smoker's cough, and even though the frequency of my smoking only increased, the hypnosis completely eliminated the symptoms and hypnosis is inhibiting my ability to speak. Sorry about that. The hypnosis completely eliminated the symptoms of smoker's cough and raised more concerns for my health. I was also told that the hospitals and doctors were going to lie to me about any medical conditions I developed as part of the contract for the movie production. I was hypnotized to think that the medication Klonopin meant I was making movie scenes and that the medication Valium meant an emergency medical intermission for my movie so that I could get actual medical care. But I was hypnotized to not know what they were supposed to mean. I was hypnotized to feel pain in the small of my back in between my shoulder blades and severe muscle tension on the right side of my back underneath my shoulder blade so that I'd have to crack my back frequently for relief. I was told that they did this to me because they wanted me to develop back problems, impairing my sexual performance and making sexual intercourse seem painful, which is why I was hypnotized to think you can't be sexy for it. Whenever I tried to crack my back, the Charlie Sheen has AIDS hypnotic metaphor was another threat towards my sexual and reproductive health. I was hypnotized to think that if I jumped off a flight of stairs in jail for medications that I might not only break my legs, but that I could actually fracture my spinal cord as well, and that I could become paralyzed from the waist down as a result, which would not only mean I would never be able to walk again, but that I would never be able to hump again either. I was also hypnotized to think about taking my dog on a walk when I thought about never being able to walk again if I jumped off the flight of stairs, which is further evidence that Christine Price told me that the doctors hoped that I would break my legs and become crippled like my dog did when I experienced catalepsy from sleep deprivation after being taken off my sleeping medication Ambien. Sorry, the hypnosis is inhibiting my ability to speak. Since I was hypnotized to think that holding my hands in a ball meant that I had the world in my hands, I was also hypnotized to think that it was a reference to Billie Eilish's documentary, The World's a Little Blurry, because the world I was holding in my hands would be a little blurry in the video surveillance from the jail security cameras. I was also hypnotized to think presenting the security footage from the jail as evidence in court meant the world's a little blurry too, and Stanford County Prison Experiment 2, because it would be like a sequel to the two different documentaries. I was also hypnotized to think Billie Eilish's documentary, The World's a Little Blurry, was a reference to my dog's cataracts, because when my dog would go outside, the world would be a little blurry because her vision was blurry. I was also hypnotized to think Charlie Sheen has AIDS meant Charlie Sheen has dogs because my dogs helped me with my hyperventilation syndrome and my PTSD symptoms, and because my dogs were referenced multiple times in the hypnotic metaphors. And then there are some more of these here. Let's see. So this was the last threat in the letters. You will die. What are you dying for? I was hypnotized to think that meant you will know. What are you waiting for? Reference to the Nickelback song, What Are You Waiting For? That's what I was hypnotized to think that meant. So I was also hypnotized to even, have the song playing in my head, except, what are you dying for? The same way that the singer sings, what are you waiting for? So the suggestion associated with the song also was, I have malpractice, I want my money back. I was told that I was supposed to tell the hypnotist how to stop me from becoming famous, and that if the hypnosis didn't work to stop me from becoming famous, that they had malpractice against me and wanted to sue me because they thought it would have worked. I was also hypnotized to think Nickelback meant I want my money back because Nickelback was a metaphor for a refund, referencing I want my nickel back. And then, let's see. And then I was also hypnotized to think that it also meant, what are you wanting for? Looping back to when he quoted, you can't get what you want unless what you want is to die for me. Okay, and we're almost to the end of this. Throughout the death threat letters, John Matthew Hurl made several religious references, drew several crosses, and even referred to himself as Satan. The crosses and religious references had very similar patterns to the religious post-hypnotic suggestions they used on me, making me wonder if the people who hypnotized me also hypnotized him. I was hypnotized to think that the post-hypnotic suggestions involving handwriting and drawing meant I was worshiping the devil, and I was hypnotized to think of these when he referred to himself as Satan, and also while analyzing his handwriting. I was also hypnotized to think of a series of hypnotic metaphors pertaining to red devils, devil's advocate, Republicans, Democrats, and even something they referred to as a deal with the devil. I will explain these now. I was hypnotized to remember a time when I was told by a Catholic woman that some people actually believe that ADHD isn't real and that it was a type of demonic possession because amphetamine medications would have paradoxical effects on ADHD patients and calm them down. When I was hypnotized, they told me that they were going to help me improve my handwriting with hypnosis because I had very messy and sloppy handwriting. Since I have ADHD, I was told that the reason they helped me improve my handwriting was because if I was going to be the president, that they couldn't have a president with sloppy handwriting. I was hypnotized to think that analyzing handwriting was worshiping the devil because I learned to analyze handwriting from being hypnotized. Sorry, the hypnosis is hypnotized to feel angry, resisting post-traumatic suggestions. And again, hypnotized to feel worse and back pain for it too. To try to cover up why the hypnosis is inhibiting my ability to speak and try to blame it on back pain when it's not caused by back pain at all. It's just caused by hypnosis because I'm being tortured and abused. So I really apologize. I was hypnotized to remember a time when I was told by a Catholic woman that some people actually believe that ADHD isn't real and that it was a type of demonic possession because amphetamine medications would have paradoxical effects on ADHD patients and calm them down. When I was hypnotized and told that they were going to help me improve my handwriting with hypnosis because I had very messy and sloppy handwriting since I have ADHD, and I was told that the reason they helped me improve my handwriting was because if I was going to be the president, that they couldn't have a president with sloppy handwriting. I was hypnotized to think that analyzing handwriting was worshiping the devil because I learned to analyze handwriting from being hypnotized to improve my handwriting because I had ADHD. So if I was analyzing handwriting, it was because I have ADHD, and since ADHD is the devil, then analyzing handwriting was worshiping the devil. I was hypnotized to think of a pitchfork when I would write a capital letter Y, and that if I was analyzing my handwriting changes, that it was a devil's pitchfork. I was also hypnotized to think that when I was hypnotized to draw on the walls of the jail, that it also meant I was worshiping the devil. The handwriting and drawings were how I identified John Matthew Hurl was hypnotized when he wrote the death threat letters, and since I was hypnotized to think that analyzing his handwriting and drawings meant I was worshiping the devil, that everything I would be able to do to investigate the death threat letters was worshiping the devil. So let's see here. Not very much left. Christine Price phrased that signing the contract with G-Eazy, Donald Trump, and the Make-A-Wish Foundation, making a movie, and letting Donald Trump run the country for me was like a little deal with the devil. Christine Price also told me that Donald Trump came up with the idea for Marlboro Cigarette Company to buy cannabis cigarettes from the Mexican cartel after cannabis was legalized. Christine Price also told me that Donald Trump made a deal with Marlboro Cigarette Company that Marlboro was going to pay me to advertise their cigarettes by smoking their cigarettes during my movie, and that Donald Trump was supposed to be my devil's advocate for doing it. I was told that since Donald Trump did this, that I wouldn't have to be scared of violent retaliation from the Mexican cartel for legalizing cannabis because the Mexican cartel could actually legally profit from cannabis legalization instead of losing tremendous amounts of profit. I was told that devil's advocate meant doing something immoral but doing it anyways because it wasn't that bad. I was hypnotized to think devil's advocate often when I took my first drag off a cigarette, when I first lit it, without knowing what it meant or what cued the thought. I was told that Marlboro Cigarette Company had a contract that would protect me from contracting sexually transmitted diseases during my movie as long as I smoked their cigarettes during my movie. I was also hypnotized to think that devil's advocate meant I can get laid again. Since the actor Will Smith was actually offered a lot of money from cigarette companies to smoke cigarettes in his movies, but did the moral thing and refused to set a bad example for children by smoking in his movies, this was used as an example for why Donald Trump was playing devil's advocate for me to smoke in my movie because it was immoral, but I should do it anyways because it wasn't that bad. Devil's advocate was a hypnotic metaphor used to attempt to demoralize me by conditioning me to believe that being moral and doing the right thing was the wrong thing to do because I would contract sexually transmitted diseases from it. Sexually transmitted diseases from it. But if I acted immorally, that I would be able to get laid again. This was also a method of keeping me addicted to cigarettes and financial exploitation, as well as because Marlboro cigarettes were expensive. Because Marlboro cigarettes were expensive. And then really close to being done. And then Republicans, they told me that since Donald Trump was a Republican and doesn't want to change anything, that as long as I was a Republican and let Donald Trump run the country for me, that I could have sex again. They told me metaphors while I was hypnotized that pertained to the syllables that comprise the word Republican. I was hypnotized to think of an Irish pub because of the syllable pub in the word Republican, and to think that it meant I could drink alcohol and it's not a big deal. I was hypnotized to think that the syllables lickin' in the word Republican meant lickin' or licking and was a reference to oral sex. I was hypnotized to think the syllable re in the word Republican meant I could do these things repetitively as long as I let Donald Trump run the country for me, and I was a Republican because I could go to a pub and get a lickin' over and over again. This was a hypnotic metaphor threatening me that referenced being hypnotized to not drink water and developing urinary incontinence in an attempt to deter me from lobbying for political reform. By the way, the hypnosis in my spine, my hypnotized my muscles contract to deter me from speaking and to try to conceal the hypnotic speech impairment too. And then I was hypnotized to do that too when I said how it was used to conceal it. I was hypnotized to think that red devils were Republicans because Republicans were represented by the color red, and because they'd advocate for me to behave immorally as long as I was Republican, as if they were playing devil's advocate. I was also hypnotized to think that Republicans were like red devils because they were, quote, horny. Democrats. I was hypnotized to think that they were going to force me to involuntarily contract sexually transmitted diseases if I was a Democrat. I was hypnotized to think that the more I wanted to change the world, the more they were going to change my reproductive health and reproductive organs, making me unhealthy. I was hypnotized to think this was a reference to a Ziggy Marley song called Change Your World, and a reference to the Obama campaign slogan, Change. I was also hypnotized to think if I was a Democrat that my sex life would be like a video game demo, because I could try being a Democrat, but after I try it, I might not like it. And, of course, I wouldn't get the entire video game. It would only be a demo, right? So there's that. And then this is the last part of it, part 4. Almost done. So the context of the letters mentioning Donald using... the context of the letters mentioning Donald was pertaining to the government, and implies the Donald that he was referencing was political. If the Donald mentioned in the letter regarding a government, sorry about that, the hypnosis is inhibiting my ability to speak right now. The context of the letter mentioning Donald was pertaining to the government, and implies the Donald that he was referencing was political. Much easier to say, since I pointed that out. If the Donald mentioned in the letter regarding our government was not specifically Donald Trump, this still would raise considerable suspicion regarding the letter content being premeditated, since we would both be referencing two different government-affiliated individuals who were both coincidentally named Donald. Anyways, so that's that. I actually recorded this also on 2 different phones, just to make sure that, nothing happens to the videos, and I have to have a backup copy, of course. So, thanks for watching the video.